Welcome to The Explainer. This is where we love to dig into some really big and sometimes very controversial ideas.
All right, let's just jump right in with a pretty huge question. Is it possible for life to just appear out of nowhere from something totally dead, like a rock? Well, we're about to explore the story of a scientist who said yes, absolutely. He claimed he saw it happen with his own eyes, challenging the very definition of life itself.
So this whole story really kicks off with these weird little things he discovered. He called them bions. And what are they? Well, imagine these tiny little energy vesicles, as he put it. He believed they were the bridge between dead stuff and living things. The idea was that when any matter, and I mean anything, living or not, breaks down, it releases these bions. So how do you prove something like that? Well, Reich came up with this experiment that was honestly incredibly simple, but also pretty profound. He just wanted to see what would happen if you took something completely dead, like totally inert, and blasted it with a ton of energy. So he took regular old coal dust, heated it up until it was glowing red hot, and then dunked it into a sterile liquid. And what he said he saw, well, it was just astonishing. He puts the sample under a high-powered microscope, and the stuff that was just dead, motionless coal dust before, it wasn't dead anymore. He saw these tiny little vesicles breaking off from the coal. And they weren't just floating around, they were moving on their own, pulsing with some kind of internal energy.
Okay, and this is where it gets really wild, because these things weren't just jiggling around. He observed them doing things that living things do. For one, they had this distinct blue glow. They were pulsating, expanding and contracting with a steady rhythm. When he tried to stain them with biological dyes, they reacted just like living cells do. And maybe the most critical part? He found he could do this with anything: soil, food, even iron filing.
Now, you might be thinking, hold on a second. And you'd be right. The scientific community had a perfectly good explanation for tiny things wiggling in water. It's called Brownian motion, the random jiggling caused by water molecules smacking into particles. So was that all this was? Just simple physics?
But Reich insisted, no way. He argued that what he was seeing was completely different. See, Brownian motion is random, it's erratic, it's an external force. What he claimed he saw was movement with a purpose, with direction. It seemed to be coming from an internal engine, and that pulsation, that rhythmic expanding and contracting, there's no way simple physics could explain that. He was convinced the energy came from inside the bions themselves.
So if this wasn't just physics, what was it? Reich needed a name for this living energy that he believed he'd found, and he called it orgone energy. For him, this wasn't just some small discovery. He believed he had tapped into a fundamental, primordial energy of the universe, the actual life force. But here's a fascinating twist. The moment he thinks he's discovered this incredible life-giving energy, he immediately finds its dark opposite. It's like, in the process of studying creation, he couldn't help but stumble upon the force of decay. He gave these things a pretty ominous name, T. bacilli, which basically stood for death germs. And they were the complete opposite of the bions. They weren't blue and pulsating, they were tiny, black, and looked like little spears. And they didn't come from superheating things, they came from rot and decay. And the really chilling part? He claimed he found them in massive quantities in diseased tissue, particularly in cancer. So what happens when you put these two forces together? Well, according to Reich, when he put them on the same microscope slide, an actual battle would break out. He described how the blue, life-positive bions would literally hunt down the black T. bacilli, paralyzing them and then destroying them. It was like watching a war between life and death on a microscopic scale. This whole observation led him to propose a pretty radical new diagnostic test. His theory was this: if you took a sample of healthy blood and heated it up, it would break down into those good blue bions. But if you did the same thing with the blood of a cancer patient, it would break down into the black T. bacilli. He even claimed this test could spot the disease long before any tumors even started to form. Okay, so we've got this idea of a life energy and a death energy, but that opens up an even bigger question, right? If this energy is real, can it be transferred? Can a strong living thing literally share its life force with something weak and dying? To test this, he ran another experiment. He took weak, dying red blood cells and mixed them in with some really potent bions he'd cultured from healthy soil. And what he reported seeing was just incredible.
He said a visible, glowing bridge of light would actually form between the healthy bions and the weak cells. It looked like the dying cells were literally drinking the energy through this bridge. And afterward, they'd start to regain their color and even begin pulsing again.
As incredible as that sounds, it's what came next that was his most radical claim of all. I mean, this one goes against one of the most fundamental principles of biology. We're all taught that complex life has to come from other complex life, right? An amoeba comes from another amoeba. Well, Reich was about to say, that's just not true. He claimed he watched it happen, step by step, right there under his microscope. He saw decaying grass releasing its bions into a sample of water. Then, he watched as these individual bions started to clump together. After a while, a membrane actually formed around the clump. The bions inside all fused together into what looked like protoplasm. And then, this new little blob just detached and started moving around on its own, a brand new amoeba.
And if that's true, well, it led him to an absolutely terrifying new theory about cancer. He started to believe that a cancer cell isn't just one of your own cells that's gone haywire. He proposed it was something else entirely. A new organism, a kind of primitive protozoa spontaneously generating itself out of your body's own dying, diseased tissue.
So all of this is leading up to his final, and maybe his most mind-bending experiment. He felt like he'd already shown that life could come from dead matter, but he wanted to take it one step further. What if you took matter out of the equation completely? Could you create life from nothing?
To do this, he created something he called bion water. He boiled earth and water, believing this would release all of its orgone energy into the liquid. Then he filtered that water over and over so meticulously that he was certain there were absolutely zero solid particles left. What he had, in his mind, was just pure water, but water that was supercharged with this dissolved life energy. And then he stuck it in the freezer.
This was it, the ultimate test of his entire theory. Can life actually organize itself from pure energy alone, with no matter to start with? Can you literally create something from nothing?
The results he wrote down are, frankly, world-shattering. He said that as the ice block made of this special water started to thaw, little snowflake-like flakes began to just appear, condensing out of the perfectly clear water. He identified them as living protoplasm. And it didn't stop there. He claimed he watched these flakes grow, divide, and then assemble themselves into living protozoa, swimming around in water that he was sure had been completely empty moments before. For Reichs, the conclusion from this was unavoidable. It meant that energy is more fundamental than matter itself. His work, he believed, had shown that pure life energy could actually create matter out of thin air, and then organize that new matter into a living thing.
And so that's our look at these incredibly controversial experiments. Look, whether you think Reich was a genius who stumbled upon a fundamental truth, or that his observations were deeply flawed, it leaves us with this huge question. What if life isn't just a series of complex chemical reactions? What if it really is a function of some kind of cosmic living energy? If that were true, what else about our universe might we be completely missing?